Я вас всех приветствую, братья и сестры. У нас будет как проповедь по-английски звучать, но меня попросили пару слов, о чем мы именно будем говорить сегодня. Сегодня будем говорить о God's provision. Как можно? God's provision. Да, большое обещание, provision, что Он нам будет давать. И пару из местов из Писания будет, которые будет говориться из местов, да, будет про the widow, который масло лила, да, и у нее много осталось. А потом про когда Иисус Христос проповедовал, и им надо было кормить около 5000 человек, когда мальчик дал хлеб, все. Не извините, мне только что сказали, надо было по-русски сказать. So one of the things that I wanted to start with was basically an introductory and with a question, right? Is what is it that we do when we feel like we're not enough, or something that we have in our life that's just not enough, right? Whether it could be not enough strength, not enough money, not enough answers that we're seeking, or not enough peace on our hearts. When it just feels dry, when our hope feels dry. You know, maybe some of us was there throughout our lives. When the bills are due, but our bank accounts are quiet, or when the things around us, you know, the needs around us, they need you, but you just feel powerless to fulfill those needs, where your life demands more than you're capable of giving. And one of the phrases that we know is, if you guys know, is Jehovah Jireh, right? The Lord will provide. It comes from Genesis 22 and 14, when Abraham, he named the mountain where he was going to... It was basically the mountain where he brought his son up, right, to sacrifice his son for God, right? And after God provided him the ram, he named the mountain the Lord will provide, which translates to Jehovah Jireh. But the thing is what about when we're still up on that mountain, when we're still waiting for that ram to show up, to be provided for us? What do we do when the provision that was promised to us hasn't come yet? You see, in those moments, that's where our faith gets tested. That's where our trust in God, that's when it gets real. That's when it gets hard. So there's two stories that I want to bring up today. It's about two different people. It's in two different testaments, two different situations in life, but it all comes to the same thing, that it may look like the offerings that they had just seemed like they were way too small and almost pointless to give. And yet through their faith and through their surrender, we see the truth revealed. When you give the little that you have into the hands of a faithful God, He will always prove Himself to be more than enough, even if what we give is too little. In 2 Corinthians 9:8 says, "The God is able to bless you, and God is able to bless you abundantly, so that in all things at all times, having all that you need, you will abound in every good work." You see, He doesn't need much to do much. He just needs your yes, He needs your surrender, and He needs your trust and obedience. So as we look at these two stories, these two lives, that maybe one of these stories might sound a lot like yours. So if we open 1 Kings 17, 7th through 16th. It's about Elijah and the widow at Zarephath. Sometime later, the brook dried up because there had been no rain in the land. When the word of the Lord came to him, "Go at once to Zarephath, in the region of Sidon, and stay there. I have directed a widow there to supply you with food." So he went to Zarephath. When he came to the town gate, a widow was there gathering sticks. He called to her and asked, "Would you bring me a little water in a jar so I could have a drink?" As she was going to get it, he called, "And bring me, please, a piece of bread." "As surely as the Lord your God lives," she replied, "I don't have any bread, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little olive oil in a jug. I am gathering a few sticks to take home and make a meal for myself and my son, that we may eat it and die." Elijah said to her, "Don't be afraid. Go home and do as you have said. But first," focus on the but first, "make me a small loaf of bread for me for what you have, and from what you have, and bring it to me, and then make yourself something for yourself and your son. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says: the jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry until the day the Lord sends rain on the land." So, in the Old Testament, we all know the story. The land was dry. The skies were silent. The people of Israel, they were suffering through a devastating drought, one that have turned into famine. And this wasn't just a natural disaster. There was a reason to why it was happening. It turned into a spiritual one, a spiritual disaster. The nation had turned its heart away from God, and now they were reaping the consequences of their actions. In the middle of it all, Elijah, a man who obeyed God even when it didn't make any sense, but he still had his trust. At first, Elijah, he was hiding in the brook of Kerith, drinking from the stream, being fed by ravens, just enough to survive each day through this famine. And then in verse 7, you see sometime later the brook dried up because there had been no rain in the land. Now I have a question. Have any of us been in a place where that used to provide for us suddenly dried up? Whether it was a job that you depended on, or it was a contract that you were hoping that's going to pass, or you were going to sell a house and you were ready, but then it fell through. Or what about a relationship that you leaned on? Whether it was your closest friend, your parents, your brother, the strength that you had suddenly wasn't the same. See, the brook dried up. But notice, you see, God, he didn't abandon Elijah because of the situation. No, he redirected him. He told him to go to a place. Then the word of the Lord came to him, "Go at once to Zarephath. I have directed a widow there to supply you with food." And if you really think about it, God could have sent Elijah to a wealthy man, to a wealthy family. God could have sent Elijah to a trader that traded a lot of goods, that had a large stockpile, someone that had more than enough to provide for an extra person, but no. But instead, God sends him to a widow, and not just a widow, a Gentile widow in a foreign country living in poverty. And when Elijah gathers himself and leaves and arrives to this place, he sees someone gathering sticks, the widow. She's not rich. She is absolutely not ready to have any guests in the house. She's doing the same thing, just trying to survive the day. And Elijah, the prophet of God, says something that sounds almost offensive, almost outrageous. "Would you bring me a little water in a jar and bring me, please, a piece of bread?" Now, can you imagine that? What you're going through. In her shoes, she's having struggles, barely making it through, and somebody that she has no idea from another town shows up and says, "Give me something." You could almost feel her hesitation, her heartbreak, her hopelessness, going like, "Wait, what do you mean?" And then she says, "As surely as the Lord your God lives, I don't have any bread. Only a handful of flour in a jar and a little olive oil in a jug. I'm gathering a few sticks to take home and make a meal for myself and my son, that we may eat it and die." Now let that sink in for a little bit. Doesn't seem like she was exaggerating, or perhaps doesn't seem like she was being dramatic or lazy or have any irresponsibility, right? She was at her end, whether it was emotionally, physically, well, even financially. She had nothing left but one final meal and the expectation of death. And right there at her lowest moment, God's provision, it shows up in a form of request and not a handout. Now, isn't that just like the God we serve? We expect one thing and then something else completely happens and you're like, wait, what? He doesn't always come in the way we expect. He doesn't always show up and say, hey, here, I got this. Let me fix this for you. No, he sometimes shows up and says, will you give me this first? Will you give me the little that you have? In Isaiah 55, 8 through 9, it says something that really matches this situation. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts more than your thoughts. You see, the widow, she expected to run out of what she had, but God had other plans at the time. Elijah tells her, don't be afraid, go home and do as you have said, but first make a small loaf of bread for me. Then make something for yourself and your son, for this is what the Lord says, the jar of flour will not be used up and the jug of oil will not run dry until the day of the Lord sends rain on the land. Now that is faith. And not just on Elijah's part, but on hers. You see, she didn't argue. She didn't say, no, let me feed my son first. I mean, let's be completely honest. If we were in the same situation now and you have a child, are you going to say, yeah, sure, here, let me feed you first? No, absolutely not. I know myself, I would have been, no, my family comes first. I don't know you. That's just the reality of it. That's how we're brought up because this is our responsibility, our family. No, but she obeyed. She just did it. She gave the little that she had, and verse 15 tells us what happens next. She went away and did as Elijah had told her. So there was food every day for Elijah and for the woman and her family, for the jar of flour was not used up and the jug of oil did not run dry, and it never ran out. Not the first day, not the 5th, not the 10th, not until the rain returned to the land. Her obedience, what it did was it unlocked the provision that God has promised. Her little that she had in the hands of God became more than enough. So my next question is, how many of us feel like something's running out as well? Whether it is your finances, whether it is your energy, your faith. We just had a baby, and my wife said, add patience to that list too. The strength to keep going. What if, just like this widow, God is asking you to trust him, not after God gave you what he promised, no, but before that happened, to give when it seems like I have nothing to give, or to serve even when you're done, you're tired, I can't keep going, or to obey even when it feels like you have nothing more to give. Because the truth is that God doesn't bless empty hearts that stay closed. He blesses them when the hands open up and you say, God, this is all that I have. I mean, it's not enough, but take it all. It's yours. And Philippians 4:19 reminds us that, and my God will supply all your needs according to his riches in glory in Christ Jesus. He doesn't ask for what you don't have. He asks for the little things that you do have. Because when you're little that you have, the little amount meets his divine, that is unlimited, incredible miracles can happen. If we open to John 6, I want to read from the first verse. Sometime after this, Jesus crossed to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee. And the great crowd of people followed him because they saw signs he had performed by healing the sick. Then Jesus went up to the mountainside and sat down with his disciples. The Jewish Passover festival was near. When Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming towards him, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat?" And he asked this only to test him, for he already had in mind what he was going to do. Philip answered him, "It would take more than half a year's wages to have enough bread for each one to just have a bite." Another one of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up, "Here is a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. But how far will they go among so many?" Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." There was plenty of grass in the place, and they sat down. About 5,000 men were there. Jesus then took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted. He did the same with the fish. When they had all had enough to eat, he said to the disciples, "Gather the pieces that are left over. Let nothing be wasted." So they gathered them, filled 12 baskets with the pieces of the 5 barley loaves left over, by those who have eaten. After the people saw the sign Jesus performed, they began to say, "Surely this is the prophet who is to come into the world." Now, as we move from the Old Testament to the New Testament, you see, we got the same situation. The same God and a similar pattern of what happened with the widow. Jesus has been teaching and healing the crowds, and the crowd won't leave him. The people are hungry, not spiritually anymore, but physically. And the Bible tells us there was about 5,000 men that were there. Now, as people research the story, since this is a very big story that everybody knows about, it is led to believe that it wasn't just the 5,000 men that were there. In addition to that, there could have been numerous amount of children, women. So many will believe that the amount of people that were there could have been anywhere close to about 15,000 people at the time of this teachable moment when Jesus was teaching and healing. Jesus turns to Philip and says, "Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat?" And it's funny how someone that has a plan for everything asks one of his disciples and says, "What should we do?" See, but Jesus, he already knew what he was going to do. But he asks the question anyway. Why? Because just like Elijah and the widow, Jesus, he isn't just solving a problem. He is revealing a principle. He's giving a teachable moment to Philip at the time. He's training Philip to think differently. Not with the eyes of scarcity of somehow what we see, no, but with the eyes of faith. And Philip, he would respond like many of us would. He would do the math. It would take more than half a year's of wages to buy enough bread for each one to have a bite. That's like saying, Lord, it would take, in today's terms, would be $22,000, $23,000 on the average of how much somebody makes. So just to, in retrospect, to kind of understand how much half a wages at the time was, back in the time of Jesus Christ, the average amount of money people made per day was 1 denarius, roughly about 6 days a week because they don't work on the Sabbath. We're looking at about 300 working days a year, so the annual income would be about 300 denarii. So if we convert that to now, with the average dollar amount, how much like a blue-collar worker or a laborer would make, since that's what they did all the time there, labor work, so it would come up to maybe $120 to $200 per day. So if we take 1 denarius to convert that, that'd be about $150 worth now, right? So that's about $45,000 to $50,000 a year. So if 1 denarius was $150, then Philip straight up would just say it would take half a year's of wages. So yeah, in now times it would take about $22,000, $23,000 to be able to just give a bite to the amount of people that were there. not even to feed them all the way. Then Andrew shows up. Here's a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fishes, and how far will they go among so many? Now I want to notice on the boy that has no name, probably quiet and scared. I mean, he showed up and the guys probably just grabbed him, let's go, right? So he's terrified. He probably got forgotten by most of the crowd there because nobody's going to notice a small boy. Just a kid that had some food with him. 5 small barley loaves, the bread of the poor, 2 fishes, probably not salmon or tuna, probably something small, as we all know, maybe sardines. So it's just a small little snack, right, that he had. And yet, this tiny amount of food that was offered to Jesus Christ that just seemed so little became one of the most iconic stories, iconic miracles that Jesus Christ has performed. And if you look at what Andrew said, here is a boy, but what is that among so many? Both hope and hopelessness in the same sentence. That's the voice of doubt dressed in realism. That's the voice that we hear all the time. Yeah, I could try, but it won't matter. It's too small. It's not going to impress anybody. It won't make a difference. My little thing that I have right now to give, that won't make a difference at all. But what if a miracle isn't just in the multiplying? What if the miracle is simply in the willingness to give? See, the boy, he might have not known that he was handing over his food to the Messiah, or he didn't know that there would be so much baskets left over of food. He didn't know that his obedience, his willingness to give, he would have been written in the book of John. He just gave what he had, and that was it. He had no guarantees that something would happen. He wouldn't have any fan base where everybody thought that, oh, you did such a great thing. No, he just had a heart that said he needs it, he can have it. And then Jesus says something that's also similarly powerful when he says, have the people sit down. Why would that matter? Because miracles, what they do is they often, when we stop striving, they begin when we often stop striving. When we just sit down and start trusting. When we stop trying to do it all ourselves and let God take over. Then Jesus takes the bread. This is maybe very familiar. Jesus takes the bread, he blesses it, he breaks it, and he gives. It's a very similar pattern that we know, right? As Pastor Andre on the communion day, he stands, he reads, and he took the bread, gave thanks, and broke it, and gave it to them, saying, this is my body given for you. You see, the same hands that multiplied that food that was given would one day be pierced for our salvation. And he's not just feeding bodies, no, he's revealing the nature of God's kingdom, of what he is capable of doing. God takes what we offer, he blesses it, and sometimes he will break it, and then he uses it. And what's the result? And it says the result right here, right next. They all ate and they were satisfied. They were happy. They were filled, and probably filled more than they would have been filled at home. And then the disciples gathered 12 baskets that were left over. Now we're looking at 12 baskets. Now many people might think, okay, it's just extra food. Why is there specifically 12? Jesus didn't do just enough. He gave more than enough. Now the 12 baskets, maybe it was one for each disciple. Or if you remember how they sort of doubted Jesus Christ in the beginning when they saw the 5 barley loaves? No. Or maybe the 12 baskets was left over so Jesus could say, don't you ever doubt me again. Now here's something, some of the topics that we're going to talk about with this story that I wanted to share. Where were the adults in the story, right? Where were and by that I mean were the prepared people that came? I will be gone all day. Maybe I should grab some food with me. No. See, out of 10, 15,000 people that could have been there at the time, only one person offered something. And it wasn't a father. It wasn't a leader. It was a child. Sometimes it's the young. Sometimes it's the overlooked, the quiet, the ones that you don't really notice. The simple who lead the way to faith. And that's why Jesus said in Matthew 18:3, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Because children, they don't overthink. They don't need, to do the research like we do, what the ROI is, They just trust. For a prime example, I know there's a lot of fathers here. When your child is standing on a larger platform or where you're at the pool and you're saying, hey, jump in my arms, he doesn't think that, I'm going to fall, break my hand, or no, dad's right here. Because the child, he knows that I could trust my father. He's right there. He's ready. And us as fathers, we're thinking it through. Okay, I got to catch him here. I can't drop him. Mom's going to be mad, so I got to really try here, But the kid, he doesn't think about that. He knows that the father always thinks through of everything. It doesn't even come to him that he can fall because he knows that his father can catch him. And that's what it is right here. See, the boy didn't know what Jesus would do, but he just believed and he gave. Here you go. And that's the kind of faith. That's the kind of faith that moves the mountains. Now, to get real, I had a question after this story. What small amount that you have with you today that you've been holding back? We have a very common problem, situation within our churches all around is there's always people that are worried about serving, coming out, singing, getting involved. They just like to sit quietly. When they're asked, what do you have to give to Jesus? And you're one of the 15,000 standing there going like, there's too much. What I have is too small. It's kind of embarrassing to give because it's not enough. So I'm gonna step back and just let somebody else do it. What have we been holding back? Whether it's our time, our gift, our generosity, our testimony, the trust that we have that God can take our lives and he can make it better. What if the very thing that you think that is too small, that doesn't matter, is the exact thing that Jesus wants to use to feed someone else's hunger that came here? Because when the little thing that you have meets God's hands, multiplication begins. The new path begins. And again, Ephesians 3:20 says, now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask. Imagine, according to his power, that this is the work. According to his power that is at work within us, you may not be able to feed 5,000. Two different people, two different testaments. A biblical pattern that shows what we're willing to release. The flour in the widow's jar didn't multiply until she poured it out. The bread in the boy's hands didn't multiply until it was handed over. Nothing multiplies while you're holding on to it. No, it only multiplies it when we hand it into God's hands. And the biblical pattern here states that with David's sling, it was just a boy's weapon until it took down a giant. Moses' staff could have been just a branch or a stick that turned into a symbol of power when laid before the Lord. The jar of oil just seemed insignificant, but filled every vessel when the woman kept pouring. It was after the release. It was after the obedience, the surrender, the trust that precedes overflow. So if we break that down between 4 categories: need, resources, step of faith, and the result, the widow and the boy. The need with the widow was one final meal for survival. The boy, thousands of people were hungry. What were the resources at the time? She had a handful of flour and oil. He had 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And now the step of faith. She gave before she saw provision. The boy gave without knowing what Jesus would do. And what were the results in that? She got daily ongoing provision, and for the boy, overflowing, abundant leftovers. You see, on the surface, these little things that we're giving, they just seem so small and nothing really important or significant. A little bread, a little oil, a little bit amount of food, but heaven doesn't measure worth the way we do. And it states perfectly in 1 Samuel when he went to look for David, for the king of Israel. It says in 16:7, 1 Samuel, man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. God wasn't focused on what they had. He was focused on what they did with what they had. Give, and it will be given to you. A good measure pressed down, shaken together, and running over. You see, why are we still holding on? Not because giving earns God's love, but because giving, what it does is it unlocks our trust. And trust and faith is the seed of miracles. The widow, she gave when she was at her bottom, when she had nothing left. The boy gave at the beginning, before the day even started. It was one crisis. One was in crisis, one was in preparation. One gave out because she was desperate, and one gave out because of his innocence. And both had the same outcome. God multiplied it beyond anything they could ever imagine. The powerful part is God didn't just meet the need, he went beyond it. More than enough, more than expected, more than deserved. See, now that's the heart of the God that we serve. Now, if we talk about us, because here's the truth, we might be thinking like they were at the time. You may be not gathering sticks right now. Maybe you're just going through one more week when you're just at your very end. One more bill, one more hospital visit, one more job that you hate, or one more sleepless night. How are you going to keep this together? How are you going to move on to your next day? You may be not holding on to the little amount of food that you have left, no, but maybe you feel like your faith is just small. Your influence, your strength, the hope that you have left is just too small. And if we're being honest, maybe we're just standing asking the same questions that they must have asked as well. What I have, how could it even be possibly enough? This is where our God says, I know it's not much, but give it to me anyway. Because God is not waiting for our perfection. No, he is waiting for our participation. Because it's enough. In the kingdom of God, nothing is wasted. Not the flour, not the oil, not the fish, not the pain that they were going through, not the tears, not the struggle. No, God is the multiplier. And he multiplies what you're willing to release, what you're willing to give him. Those who sow in tears shall reap in joy. The pain that you've been through, you see, God can use that. The weakness that you carry day by day, God can strengthen it. The little that you have, that little thing that is left, God can multiply it. But only when it's given. Only when it's offered to him. You don't overcome by pretending to be strong. No, you overcome by placing what your not enough is into the hands of God that is always enough. We've walked through the story of desperate widow. We've followed the boy that went through a big moment of his life. We've seen what happens to ordinary people that release the little thing that they have. into the hands of our great God. But now the question is no longer about them, it's about you. What is something, if you deep down think about it, what is something that you've been holding back? Because you thought that it might be not irrelevant enough, or maybe it's just too simple or too small, or maybe it's even too late for God to use. Maybe it's that little thing. Maybe it's that little broken thing that you have inside of you is the exact thing that God is waiting for to unlock your provision, to pour out the blessing or to write the miracle in your own story. See, the reason many of us haven't seen God's provision isn't because that God is running out of resources. No, it's because we still haven't released it out of our hands. We're still clinging to that very last part of hope, that last bit of energy, the little crumb of faith that we have, or the drop of forgiveness, or the last breath of courage. And God is whispering to you today what he spoke through the prophet of Elijah. Do not be afraid, but first trust me. First release it, surrender it. Because what you're afraid to lose might be the very thing that God is waiting to multiply for you. And we're left with a promise in Matthew 6:33. Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you. See, when we place God first in your time, in your trust, in your treasure, he will always take care of the rest. He may not do it how you expected it, or he may not do it when you expected it. He will never leave you lacking what you need for what he's called for you to do, because again, Jehovah Jireh is still the God who provides. Flour in the jar, the bread in the basket. See, they didn't multiply while they were hidden. They didn't multiply while they were clenched tightly in fear. No, they multiplied it when they released. If you take your hand in the soil and you put a seed in there and you hold it for a day maximum, 2 maybe, nothing's going to grow. The seed, it won't grow in your hand. No, it will grow when it's buried in the soil. And you've been praying for harvest, but harvest, it only begins with the sacrifice and what you're willing to give. So my last invitation here would be let's stop asking God to bless what we refuse to surrender. Let's stop praying for overflow while we still guard our little thing that is left. Let's say what the widow did. Let's do what the widow did. This is all I have, Lord, but this is yours. Take it. Or what the boy did. I don't know what you'll do with it, but it's all I have. Here you go. Because whatever we give to God, he doesn't waste it. He uses it and he blesses it. And then he multiplies it. Let's end with prayer.